There are DC-3 airframes still flying in 2026 that first entered service back in the mid-1930s, not replicas. It's not modern planes built to look old. Some of these are the actual original airframes, the same riveted aluminum skeletons, still certified, still working. Still getting the job done better than almost anything built to replace them. For 90 years, some of the biggest aircraft companies on Earth have tried to build something better. Faster, cheaper, more efficient. And none of them managed to completely replace it. Today we're going to find out why the DC-23 simply refuses to retire. And honestly, once you hear the full story, you'll understand why pilots still say the only real replacement for a DC-3 is another, DC-23. If stories like this get you hooked the way they get me hooked, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now, because this channel is full of aviation history that sounds made up but isn't, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Let's rewind all the way to 1934. American Airlines was still flying old biplanes on its overnight, coast-to-coast routes, and its president wanted something better. A plane with a cabin wide enough to fit sleeping berths side by side so passengers could actually rest on long overnight flights. He called Douglas Aircraft and pushed hard for it. Douglas himself wasn't fully convinced. His existing plane at the time had a cabin that was too narrow, and building a wider version meant a brand new design. Real money, real risk. He only agreed once American Airlines committed to actually buying a batch of them. That single commitment is really where this whole story begins. The engineering team built something that ended up far wider and roomier than anyone expected. Wide enough for 14 sleeping berths, or 21 regular seats in the daytime version. On December 17, 1935, which happened to be exactly 32 years after the Wright brothers' first flight, the prototype took to the sky for the first time. The test pilot later said the flight felt so smooth and uneventful that he barely remembered it. Sometimes the most important flights in history are the ones that feel completely unremarkable in the moment. Only a handful of the original sleeper version were ever built before the day seat version took over the production line. And that version is the one that became legendary. It entered scheduled airline service in the summer of 1936, and within less than 10 years, it had reshaped American aviation. By the mid-1940s, the DC-3 had become the dominant airliner in the United States. Quick pause here because I want to be upfront with you before we go further. This video is based on historical research and publicly available information about aviation history. Some production numbers, dates, and quotes are drawn from commonly cited historical sources. And while every effort has been made to keep this accurate, exact figures can occasionally vary slightly between different references. Alright, back to the story. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Civilian production of this aircraft stopped in the early years of World War II, not because demand dried up, but because the military took over the entire production line. Tens of thousands of military versions rolled out of factories across the United States, used to haul troops, cargo, and supplies on nearly every front of the war. The Soviet Union built their own licensed copy. Japan built their own version too. By the time you add every civilian and military variant together, the total production number reached well into the tens of thousands of aircraft. That single fact is actually the reason nobody could ever successfully replace this plane. Once the war ended, thousands of these military aircraft flooded the surplus market at incredibly low prices. Any company trying to sell a brand new replacement wasn't just competing against a good airplane. They were competing against the US government's own surplus stock being sold off for pennies on the dollar. It's extremely hard to convince an airline to buy an expensive new plane when a nearly identical used one is available for a fraction of the price. Douglas actually tried to replace their own creation a few years later, building a stretched, more powerful, more modern version meant to meet new safety standards. On paper, it was better in almost every way. In practice, it was a commercial flop. Only a handful were ever built, and just a few of those went to a paying commercial airline. The flooded surplus market had already made the decision before the new design even had a chance. Then came the turboprop era. Engineers realized that if you swapped the old heavy piston engines for lighter, more powerful turboprop engines, you might unlock a whole new life for this airframe. The first serious attempt happened in the late 1940s using British-built engines. And it actually worked. The plane flew faster and climbed better. But the original airframe wasn't built to fly high enough to fully take advantage of it, so the project quietly faded away. 2 decades later, a determined aviation engineer tried again. This time using salvaged turboprop engines pulled from a retired airliner. His conversion flew noticeably faster, and it even made an appearance at a major air show. But like the earlier attempts, it never reached full-scale production. A few smaller companies around the world built their own turboprop conversions over the following decades, and some of them built dozens of aircraft. Each one proved the concept could work. None of them became the industry standard. That changed with one man who had been quietly running a small aircraft service out of Wisconsin since the 1950s. In 1990, he founded a company dedicated entirely to doing a proper, thorough conversion instead of a quick fix. His team would strip each aircraft down to a small fraction of its original metal, rebuild the rest with modern materials, and get it recertified by federal aviation authorities as what's essentially a brand new aircraft, with every mandatory inspection clock reset to 0, regardless of how many decades the original airframe had already flown. They installed modern turboprop engines that were dramatically lighter than the old piston engines, which actually created a new engineering challenge. They had to stretch the fuselage slightly just to keep the aircraft properly balanced. That stretch ended up being a bonus, adding significantly more usable cabin space. The end result could carry a dramatically heavier load than the original, cruise noticeably faster, and perform better on a single engine in an emergency than the original could manage, even on both engines combined. There was one trade-off nobody advertised loudly. The new engines actually burned more fuel per hour than the old ones, which meant standard range actually went down slightly. The company solved that by offering extended fuel tank options that pushed the range out even farther than the original aircraft ever achieved. And they marketed the whole package around one simple pitch: dramatically higher productivity at roughly half the operating cost of the original. Today, these converted aircraft are doing jobs the original 1935 design never could have imagined. Research and supply missions to the South Pole, cargo runs across the Canadian Arctic, wildfire smoke jumper drops for forest services, cloud seeding flights, coastal survey missions using sensors instead of passenger seats. Some have also been adapted for specialized military missions, including counter-narcotics operations. As recently as a few years ago, the company doing these conversions reported their order books completely full for the year. So why did this one aircraft survive 90 years of attempts to replace it when far more advanced designs came and went? The answer really comes down to one decision. Every other company tried to build something entirely new. The company that actually succeeded realized the original structure, that wing, that fuselage, it's built back in 1935 for one overnight airline route between 2 American cities, was massively overbuilt for its time. It was strong enough to carry loads, engines, and equipment nobody in the 1930s could have possibly planned for. Instead of trying to replace that structure, they just kept finding new ways to put better engines on it. Quick reminder before we wrap up: this video is intended purely for historical and educational purposes. Some production figures, dates, and technical specifications referenced are drawn from historical estimates and publicly available sources, and may vary slightly depending on which reference you check. If this story surprised you even a little, let me know in the comments which part stood out to you the most. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time, because we cover stories exactly like this every single week. Sharing this with a friend who's into aviation or history genuinely helps this channel grow. So if you enjoyed it, go ahead and pass it along. Thanks for watching all the way to the end, and I'll see you in the next one.